Hey, it's me, James, and in this video, I'm going to be doing another lightning round oracle card pull for Gemini season. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for another lightning round oracle card pull session. As I've done in the previous sessions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull one card for each sign representing what you could possibly experience during this time of Gemini season, because as I'm filming this, we are transitioning from Taurus season to Gemini season. So again, one card for each sign, but here's what you could do to make it a more substantial reading for yourself. If you are aware of what your sun sign is, your moon sign is, and your rising sign, you could take those individual cards and combine them for a 3-card reading. For instance, I'll give you an example. Like my sun is in Pisces, my moon is in Aquarius, and my rising sign is Sagittarius. So what I would do is I would take the card for Pisces, the card for Aquarius, and the card for Sagittarius and put them together to form a 3-card reading. So just keep that in mind. You could still go with the individual card if you know your sun sign but you're not sure about your moon or your rising. Or you could do like I'm suggesting for a more substantial reading and take those 3 cards into account. Okay, so now the deck that I'm going to be using, last month when I did the reading session for Taurus season, I picked the deck because I had been aware that through Make Playing Cards, the company that I work with to print my own decks, I had a sale. So I used that deck that was sold over the course of that month. Well, just so happens that it has happened again. And this time I'm going to be working with my own tarot deck, which is the Mitchell Tarot. This was the deck that was sold over the course of the month through Make Playing Cards. So I'm going to be using that. And plus, I like the idea of highlighting my own personal decks. These are the decks that I created for myself and for those who might find them of interest. But I also enjoy working with them. So I thought, well, why not, right? So what you're seeing me doing now is I'm shuffling the cards. And I'm doing it so it can be seen on camera. So that's how I shuffle when I'm shuffling in hand. I'm also going to take a moment to shuffle the cards on the table in front of me. And as I'm shuffling the cards, I'm just asking the general question is like, what does each sign need to know that's in its best interest overall, best and highest good, in terms of insight or guidance for the Gemini season that we are about to experience. All right. Do a couple more times this way. Alright, great. I'm going to stop there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the deck. And then I'm going to form one pile. And then just as I've done in previous sessions, what I'm going to do is I'm just literally going to pull a card off the top of the deck and start there. So, for Gemini, if your sign is Gemini, this is your card. So here we have the 2 of Fire. So in my deck, I work with elements rather than suits. If you're familiar with tarot or you're tarot fluent, then this would be the 2 of Wands. So this is a card that talks about the idea about looking ahead and planning for the future, right? So this card would suggest for those of you who are Gemini, what are your plans for the future? This is the planning stage card. It's not about venturing on your plans or moving forward with your plans. This is literally the stage where you are forming ideas about where you want to be in the future, right? And it's about just looking ahead, having a vision for the future. So now, going with the imagery on the card, for me, this is also a card about time, right? So this is a card about when you're planning things, what's the timetable for the plan, right? Which is why the clock is kind of sort in the background behind the woman in the front of the card, right? So it's about like being aware that your plans should have some timetable attached to them, right? And it usually implies like knowing when you're at a certain stage or point in time, what would you have like to have accomplished, right, with your plan, right? So there's that. Another thing about this image is that she's standing on a train track. So that is about tracking your progress, or being at a stage in life where if you're looking ahead, are you on track? Do you feel like maybe you've gotten off track, right? And how would you plan to get back on track? But this could also be about tracking your progress, right? This is about, it's a metaphor for the journey of life, right? And where do you feel you're at in your journey of life at this point in time? The other thing I want to say about the Two of Fire is that sometimes this card can be about moving, right? So if you are planning a move, usually for me when we're talking about the move, it's usually associated with either work or business, right? So this could be somebody who is relocating for work, or like a job transfer, or they're moving to an area because the area is better in terms of job and job possibilities, right? So that's what I'm seeing with this card. Again, the chief message with Two of Fire, it's about planning and planning for the future. Okay, so that is for Gemini. Next we have Cancer. And your card is, and I love how fitting this is. Okay, so I'm going to hold the card up, and hopefully you can see it because I'm filming this on a day where it's not that sunny outside, so it may be playing with the lighting in the room. Okay, but this is one of my favorite cards in the deck. Of course, I'm biased because I made the deck. But this is the High Priestess, and the reason why I'm highlighting that it's wonderful for Cancerians is because astrologically the card is assigned the moon, and the moon is the ruling planet of Cancer. So I just love how you cannot make some of this stuff up sometimes. All right, but now, being a major arcana card, it carries more weight in a reading for me when it appears because it highlights important issues or events. So for Cancerians, the message here is to listen to your intuition, to honor your intuition. So it's about being led and guided by your feelings, right? So it's just a matter of being aware of how your intuition speaks to you. Are you even aware that your intuition speaks to you? And if so, how does it speak to you, right? So there's that. Now, the High Priestess can be a card that talks about when it's time to make decisions on something. It's very important that you wait for further information. This card would imply that you don't have all the information you need to make the best decision. So it's about waiting for that much needed information. The other thing here is that sometimes this card can be about paperwork and documentation, but it could be about like recovering lost papers or lost documents. That's one of my own personal messages for the High Priestess. Now, if you are more metaphysically minded, this card is about your intuitive or psychic development, and what could you do to further that. Now, one way could be like working with tools. So tarot is one tool that is chiefly associated with the High Priestess, right? Anything having to do with divination, so not just tarot, but any kind of divinatory tool or resource might be worth your while investing time in studying, right? In the more common depictions of the High Priestess, she is seen with a book on her lap. So that is usually just like reading. It's a pun for being a reader, but it could also just be reading up on something and studying something, right? So there's that. Going with that idea, it could also be about exploring more metaphysical or esoteric or occult topics, really diving deep into those, because this card is usually associated with the mysteries of the esoteric, right? Esoteric variety. So it could just be a matter of delving more into that. Now, I chose this particular image for the High Priestess because it represents like the idea of the triple moon aspect in the more traditional, and when I say traditional, I'm talking about the Rider-Waite-Smith variety, which this deck is modeled after or inspired by, right? So it represents like the triple moon aspect, or if you are working with the divine feminine, then it would be the triple goddess, right? For me, this could also be about the ability, if we're going with intuition and psychic ability, to look in all directions, right? So if you notice on one side, she's looking to the left, that would be retrocognition, right? Being able to look into the past. Then the image that's facing us is about being in the present consciousness or awareness. And then the aspect of her looking to the right is about looking into the future, right? So there's like getting like all aspects. And as I'm saying that, I'm pulling back. I'm being told to pull back. And if you're not into the intuitive or psychic aspects of this card, as I'm suggesting, then it could just be a matter of taking a look at a situation from all possible aspects, sides, and angles. Yeah, all perspectives. And that would go back to, especially if you're needing to make a decision, it's about looking at it from all possible sides. And that would help you make the best decision possible. So those are my meanings and associations for the High Priestess, and that is for Cancer. Okay, so now we're moving to Leo. And the card I have for you is the Queen of Air. So now, I talked about elements before. So if you are Tower fluent, this would be the Queen of Swords, right? So first off, I'm going to go with the idea that this could represent a person. And if it represents a person, it would represent the possibility of a challenging person, right? I would go with the Queen being a woman, first and foremost. So it could be dealing with a challenging or difficult or problematic woman. That's usually the gist of it, because the suit of air usually for me represents problems, challenges, and troubles, right? So we have that as an idea. It could also be a woman who is either divorced, widowed, or separated, right? It usually implies being on her own, that kind of thing. So that may further describe the woman. It could also be a woman who comes across quite cold or distant. So there's that aspect. So usually for me, it can imply a woman. I tend to go more with the idea that court cards talk about how we can approach a situation, right? So going with that, it could just be a matter of remaining calm, cool, collected as you move through this season, right? It could just be a matter of maybe being a little more rational, analytical, logical in your approach to things, right? Because the air is the thinker, right? It's the element of the intellect, the mind, right? So it could just be a matter of being a little more rational, analytical, logical as you approach things. Now, as a message, it could also be about, going with the idea that she can represent somebody who's divorced, widowed, or separated. It could be like, what do you need to remove yourself from? What do you need to quote unquote divorce yourself from? That kind of thing. Like, metaphorically, are there people, situations, conditions, circumstances you need to kind of divorce yourself or separate yourself from, right? The other thing here could be, since I'm talking about Leo, and Leo is the sign that's commonly associated with children, this card, when it turns up, can represent estrangement from children. Like, we've created distance with children. If that resonates with you, then this might be the time to consider whether or not you want to remain in that state of estrangement, or what would you be willing to do to kind of maybe foster a greater sense of reparation with that, or the idea of establishing a sense of connection or closeness again, right? And maybe giving some thought to that. Is that the thing that needs to happen in that particular relationship or not, right? But for me, this card can represent estrangement from children, right? So those are some thoughts for the Queen of Air, and that is for Leo. Okay, now moving on, we're moving on to Virgo. Oh, this is another card that I like, that I departed from the traditional depiction. So the card for you is the Three of Air, and that's for Virgo. Okay, so now here we have another air card. What I love about it for Virgo for me is a sign that represents like being methodical, right? So here we have, again, this idea about being rational, logical, maybe a little bit analytical, to pay attention to thought processes, right? With Virgos in particular, this may be about a system or a process because for me, the suit of air can also represent information, communication, but also systems and processes, right? So it could just be a matter of that. Now, going with the image. In the more traditional, and when I say traditional, I mean Rider-Waite-Smith variety of tarot, this is usually a heart that's pierced by three swords, and I didn't like that because I have other meanings for it. And as a reader and a person who's read cards for 20 plus years now, that image always unnerves people when they see it on the table. Yeah, so I wanted to go with something a little bit softer in terms of an approach, but it still means the same thing. Here, much like the Queen of Air, we have in the image, we have a woman who's walking away from a man. She's left the man, right? So sometimes this can be about severance, right? Going with the idea of like separation or divorce. It's kind of similar, right? It's about severance. What do we need to walk away from metaphorically, right? So kind of like a similar vibe to the Queen of Air. What do you need to metaphorically walk away from? What do you need to sever yourself from in terms of maybe connections, right? And again, that could be people, it could be situations, it could be circumstances. For me, going back to what I said about the Two of Fire in terms of a move, this is another move card. And usually it suggests that we're relocating to an area in which we don't know anybody, we don't have any connections there, and we don't know anybody else there, which kind of is similar to the idea of the woman walking away from the man. She may be leaving the man because she's moving into a space where he cannot go with her, right? For whatever the reason, right? So there is that possibility, and it's about like you working through the challenges of being in an area where you are by yourself and on your own, right? In some ways that might be healthy, like, getting a greater sense of independence, but on some level it may be a matter of people dealing with being homesick and away from people that they know and love, right? And so how can you best move through that? Now, what I also like about this image is that the clouds that are on either side of the card, right, can represent dealing with some sort of confusion, a misunderstanding, miscommunication, all those kinds of things. And we're trying to clear the air, right? That's the light that is in between the clouds. We're working on clearing the air. So where do you need to clear the air? And who do you need to clear the air with? Would you be willing to do that, right? And sometimes, in some cases, the best way to clear the air is maybe just to walk away from a situation, right? And maybe because it's not serving you and it's not supporting you anymore. It did, but maybe it's not, right? Especially if you feel like you're not making any progress. Here on this side, we have the man who's standing by a car, right? There's a car here. And maybe you've gotten as far as you can, right, with the situation as it is, and you don't see it progressing any further, right? And then the idea with the woman here is about like moving on, walking away. And it could also be too, like, again, a greater sense of independence, right? The idea of walking means I have the power to move on my own. I have the power to make progress on my own. It's going to be a step by step, a natural progression, but I can do it, right? So there is that idea. So this is about the Three of Air. And again, the other thing here with this card I want to say is to be mindful of communication and communication issues. I already talked about the idea about miscommunication, right? So I'm highlighting that because this card for me can rule the mouth. And so sometimes it's about either not being entirely forthcoming, or even if I go with the other extreme of it, having to deal with people who lie, right? So again, I'm always of the mindset to do the flip. So you just be aware of when people are not being totally honest with you, but also in the ways that you are not either A, being totally honest and upfront with other people or yourself, right? So that is what I want to share with the Three of Air. And again, that was for Virgo. Okay, next we have Libra. Okay. Here we have the Jester. So now this is a major arcana card, much like the High Priestess, and I have two variations of this card in the deck because it is more commonly known as the Fool. But I have a Fool card, and I wanted the Jester card, and I couldn't decide between the two, so I kept them both in there, right? Okay, so now for Libra, and I think this is highly significant in terms of imagery. because Libra is the sign that's most commonly associated with relationships, right? So, for Libra people, this is a time to consider your role or the part that you play in either relationships, circumstances, conditions. How do you show up? The mask would imply either A, playing a role, because I tend to think of masks with the idea of like actors and actresses, who play a part, right? They're paid to play parts and roles, right? They're paid to be other people in some degree, right? So it could just be a matter of, are you showing up as yourself authentically in your interactions? I won't even go with relationships because we interact with people in all sorts of ways, right? So are you showing up authentically in your interactions? Is it worth your time and effort to show up authentically in all your interactions? It might not be, right? You may be paid, like for instance, if you're on the job, you may be paid to show up a certain way, right? So for instance, I work in a customer service oriented job. Actually, both my jobs. So I deal with people a lot. And sometimes, I will confess that I have to put on what I call my game face, right? I have to put on my face to show up at those jobs, because sometimes I'm not feeling like I want to be around people and I want to deal with people and their stuff, that kind of thing. So I have to put my face on, right? So where do you need to put your face on, and where do you need to take that particular face off? Where are you willing to drop the mask? So that's the first aspect of that. For me, this card has recently come up because my Instagram account was recently hacked, right? And so for me, this card came up because I did a 3-card reading for the week that the hack took place. And this card turned up at the end of the 3-card reading. So when I do a 3-card reading for the week ahead, I usually do first card beginning of the week, middle card, second card middle of the week, and then the last card is the end of the week. Towards the end of the week, I experienced the hack. And so for me, this took on a whole new meaning, because the hack was with a person pretending to be someone that I knew. So they were pretending to be somebody else. So this is about pretense, right? And being a pretender, right? And having a disguise on, right? So the person was disguised as somebody else. And then, I, of course, let my guard down. I did try and do my due diligence, or at least I thought I did, because I went to the page because I knew the person who owns the page. So I went to the page and the page looked normal. And of course, in the end it wasn't. And I clicked on the link that I thought the person was sending me, and it turned out it was a hack, right? So there may be something of that where you have to be mindful that somebody around you or somebody that you may come in contact with is not who they pretend to be, right? So that could be have all layers of meaning. It doesn't just necessarily imply with social media, right? It could just be a matter of being more aware or being more mindful of people maybe not necessarily being who they say they are. It reminds me of a quote by the late Dr. Maya Angelou. And she used to say that when people tell you who they are, believe them. And so now when we're talking about that, it's not necessarily verbal, right? Because you're thinking the idea of telling may be around communication. But people tell you who they are through their actions, right? Communication is both verbal and non-verbal, right? So it's about you paying attention and seeing if there's a disconnect between what people say and what people do, right? And maybe giving more weight to the actions behind the words, right? Because sometimes people will betray themselves because their actions and their words don't always line up, right? And I'm saying this, I like this for Libra, right? Because this is again about relationships, right? So there is that. Now, the other thing I will say, and this again just based on my own personal experience with the card, that this card can sometimes represent something having to do with the eyes. Now, for me, in that same week that this card showed up, I had allergies, and I had really severe allergies around my eyes, right? So my eyes were really intensely red. They weren't painful, but they were really red. And I experienced what's known as sleep crust, it was really intense. Like for a couple of days, I woke up and it was covering both eyes. And I had never experienced it like that before. So there may be something for people around the eyes. Now, I said that in the literal physical sense, yeah, but it could also be in the metaphorical sense. Like you need to be mindful, be observant, notice things, pay attention, see things. Like when you see it, right? It reminds me of the expression, like once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? So it's about really being mindful, both with your eyes and your ears. It's about, using all your senses to really pay attention to what people are presenting to you and how they're presenting themselves to you, right? And it's, again, this is not something being said to put fear into people. Like, it's not fear based. It's about being more observant, allowing you to become more aware, right? So that's the thing I want to say. Now, other aspects of this card, it could be because the jester was a person or is a person who tells truth through humor. It could just be a matter of maybe what is a truth that you need to consider either accepting or expressing, right? And how can you laugh about it? How can you be lighthearted about it? It may be just a message about not taking life so seriously, right? Maybe you need to just lighten up a little bit, maybe laugh a little bit more at life, right? Sometimes for me, like when I experience challenging things, in the moment it's not so great, but somewhere down the line I could learn to laugh about it, right? So there is that, aspect of the jester as well. And then, of course, if you're tarot fluent and you're familiar with the Fool, then the Fool card is all about initiating or engaging in a new phase, a new chapter in life, and it usually carries with it the idea that you may not be as experienced moving into this stage as maybe you would like, because it's about inexperience, right? But it's about learning as you go, right? Be open to learning as you go. And sometimes this card is about taking a leap of faith, right? So those are my associations for the Jester, and that was for Libra. So now moving on to Scorpio, we have another one of my favorite cards, but it's going to say it right because I made the deck, right? So here we have the Knight of Water. So what I love about this image is that the Knight, all the Knights in Tarot, are about action, they're about direction, they're about movement, and they're also about service, right? If we go with the medieval aspect of the Knight, then the Knight was in service to the king and the queen of the area that the king and queen ruled over, right? So it could just be a matter of service. So for me, this is the spiritual seeker card. So having said that, how can you be in service to your spiritual growth and development this week? This season, right? I'm reminded of when I used to do weekly readings on a more regular basis on this channel, right? So how can you be in service to your spiritual growth and development this season, right? What are you looking for? What are you searching for, right? If you're a spiritual seeker, what are you seeking at this point in time? Because for me, in the more traditional image, he's holding a cup, and so sometimes that could represent, being in search of your Holy Grail, whatever the Holy Grail means to you, right? So there is that. Now, other things is that this is a time to maybe express creativity. This is the guy who writes poetry or writes music, very creative type, right? And so it could just be a matter of what are you creating, right? And always know, like, whether it is artistic in nature or not, we are always creating. We are all creative beings, right? So it could just be asking you, what are you creating at this point in time, right? Take a look and seeing if you like what it is that you're creating, meaning like the things in your life that are showing up. If you like that, then continue to do that. But if you don't, this is an opportunity for you to move in a new direction. That was the message that's coming in. Maybe it's time to move in a new direction, right? Now, the other thing that I will highlight here is that he has a book, right? So it kind of brings me back to similar vibes with the High Priestess, right? In terms of maybe this is a time where you're going to need to either learn something, educate yourself on something, read up on something, right? It's about acquiring some type of information or knowledge, right? That's going to be most helpful going forward, right? It could also be about the idea of journaling. He's actually writing, so it could be either, the creative pursuit or project may have to do with an actual book or manuscript, right? Or if we're talking about your spiritual growth and development, then maybe journaling might be something that's going to be extremely helpful at this point in time. The idea about getting your thoughts and your feelings out. Here we have a man, so symbolically men can represent the intellect, right? But the idea of water as an element is about, feeling, your feeling nature, right? So here we combine the two. So it could just be about, in terms of journaling, that it may be very helpful, maybe even therapeutic or cathartic to get your thoughts and feelings down on paper, get them out of your head and get them onto paper. And then maybe stepping back and then coming back and reading it so you get to see it, because once it's down in black and white, you can't deny that it's there, for you to, once you read it, you can't deny that the words are on the page, right? So there is that to consider. The other thing I will say is that the book can also be about being a reader. And one of the meanings of this card for me is that there may be an interest or a focus at this time on divination, much like the High Priestess. So what are the divinatory tools at your disposal? Or, do you need to, or are you feeling, I should say, that you want to kind of maybe delve more into one, and it would require some education on your part, right? So there's that. The other thing here, if we go with the idea about feelings, what I love about the image is that his chest is exposed, right? So this can represent, being willing to expose yourself, right? So that's a nice way of saying vulnerability, right? To someone else or other people. What is on your heart that you want to share with other people, or that you would be willing to share? Now, I say vulnerability, so that would also require a great deal of trust. Who do you trust or feel you trust well enough to share what's on your heart, right? So there's that. The other thing here I would say is that the Knight of Water is a card that talks about loving the idea of things, right, but lacking follow through. So it could just be a matter of exploring what you love or doing what you love, but also being committed to that and following through on that, right? It's not just about lip service. It's about putting the action, Knight, remember, are about action, putting the action into what it is that you say that you're going to commit to. So those are all the messages I have for Knight of Water. And I'm just doing a check. So we did Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio, right? Okay, so the next one is Sagittarius. Here we have another card. I departed from the typical image, but I love it just the same. Here we have the Five of Air. Do you notice the trend that we are getting a lot of air cards? So again, remember, air is the suit of swords in tarot, right? And I should say, going back to the Knight of Water for a minute, the suit of water is associated or equivalent to the suit of cups, right? For those of you who are tarot fluent. Okay, so now back to this card. So again, we have this idea of either something having to do with the way we think, right? Our mental processes, how we go through in our minds about situations or circumstances, yeah? Or it could be about problems, difficulties, and challenges, right? Either way, I'm going to give you a take on both. So if we go with the more mental aspect of the suit of air, the number 5 here would imply change. So it could just represent a change of mind, right? Or a change in mindset. Now, I'm going to go with a little connection here to the major arcana card. So the 5 is connected to the Hierophant from the major arcana, right? So for those of you who are tarot fluent, the Hierophant is all about beliefs and belief systems, right? So it could just be that you may be in a place where you're experiencing a change in your belief system, right? And exploring that idea or possibility, right? But it could represent on some level needing to change your mind somewhere about something. Would you be willing to do that, right? Because it's a matter of choosing to do that, right? Would you be willing to do that? So there's that. Now, this card usually represents, for me, an issue regarding communication, right? And that is symbolized by the phone, right? And the phone being red usually represents problems with communication, right? So for me, this card can turn up to represent arguments, debates, heated words being exchanged, that kind of thing. Again, going with the idea that red as a color can represent passion and anger, right? So we are doing it from a passionate place, possibly, and maybe a place from where the passion turns into anger, right? So being mindful of how we communicate. Usually this card, when we talk about communication, usually represents saying things that are belittling to people, humiliating, embarrassing, that kind of thing. It could also be in an argument, believing that you have to have the last word. Is that true? Right? The idea that the person is walking away from the phone signifies that sometimes it's better to walk away from a fight or a challenge rather than to continue, to engage, right? The phone is on the receiver of the phone is on the hook, right? Meaning like we've hung up the call, right? We're no longer on the phone and we're walking away from that conversation, that communication, right? And here's the thing. If you have had a heated exchange, or if you're going to maybe experience possibly a heated exchange, it may be a matter of walking away and not taking the anger from the conversation or interaction with you. Yeah? Right? So there is that. For me, this card is about, possibly the better idea is to walk away from a challenging conversation or experience, right? But again, I usually tend to look at this as the possibility of a change in mind or mindset or belief systems, right? So there is that with the 5 of air. Next, okay, so again, I want to do a check. So we have Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius. So now we are at Capricorn. And here we have Queen of Fire. So again, remember, the suit of fire is equivalent to wands in the more traditional tarot pack. And so here we have another queen. So I just noticed that we've had 2 queens so far. So as a theme, queens can represent caring and nurturing, right? So it may not be about a woman based on the gender on the card, but it could also be about how can we be caring, how can we be nurturing in terms of an approach. Remember, for me, court cards can always, not always, but sometimes represent approaches to situations, right? So now, if I go with that as an idea, then the approach here would be about determination. For me, when the Queen of Fire turns up, it represents being determined and more serious about something that we are engaging in, right? So fire is also the suit that has to do with work or business. So this could be dealing with a woman who is in a position of authority, again, going with the personal aspect of it, or about being caring and nurturing as an authority figure in whatever it is that you do for work or business. Now, she's also the collaborator, right? Meaning that she gets people together and then she works on getting them to agree on a situation or experience. So this could be like, a person who's working together with a team or team building and then getting everybody to come to some consensus on the project going forward, right? She can also represent somebody who's a teacher, right? Going back to the Knight of Water, what I said about writing a book, she can also be an author or somebody who works in publishing, right? So those are other aspects. So it may be a matter of if you are a creative person or if you are in the stages of writing a book, then this could just be a matter of maybe working with somebody to help you get that book out into the world, right? The idea that's coming to me is like she's possibly connected to public relations. I usually don't associate her with that, but that's what's coming to me in the moment. Now, I am reminded that one of my meanings for this card is that she is known in terms of professions as an image consultant. So now if a person is not doing image consulting in the literal sense, metaphorically this card is coming up for offering you to take a look at the image or the identity that you want to project out into the world. at this point in time. Much like the Jester card with the idea about the mask, yeah? So here we have another card that highlights this idea about image and identity. You know, are you okay with the image that you have put out into the world, or the way that people see you, right? And if not, what would you be willing to do to change that? And not change it in a way so that you are becoming um, focused on the ideas, feelings, and opinions of others, right? That you're not coming to situations with that in mind, but you're doing it because you are at a place where the way you've been showing up is no longer serving and supporting you, or that you are at a place where you feel like you are at like a crossroads in life and making a pivotal change in terms of how you show up or how you identify, right? That's what's coming to me, is like, how do you identify for yourself, and then let that be what guides you or leads you, rather than the other way around, right? It's making me feel like being self-directed rather than directed by other people, right? But of course, other people do have some effect, or are affected in the ways that we show up, right? Both in the positive and the not so positive, right? So there is that aspect of the Queen of Fire. Last thing I will say, this is a card for me that can represent being a witch, because on her arm is the tattoo of a cat, right? And so the cat for me is a nod to a familiar, and a familiar is an animal or animal spirit that a witch works with, right? So there is that. So this card for me can represent a witch. So if you will identify as a witch, then this card is about you working more with your craft, or that you are considering the idea about what does the identity of a witch mean to you. Because we all, those of us who are witches, show up differently. We're not all the same, right? So it could just be a matter of like, what's coming to me in the moment is like, what is your particular brand as a witch, right? Because this could look, a tattoo could look like a brand, like being branded, right? So what would be your particular brand of being a witch, or your craft in particular, right? Now, if I remove that aspect, going with the idea that this is a tattoo can represent making an impression, right? So it could just be a matter of what kind of impression are you making on others, or is there a situation or experience that you're having that's made an impression or has left a mark on you? And if so, what is that? Right? So that is what I want to say for the Queen of Fire. And that was for Capricorn. Next we have Aquarius. For Aquarius we have the World. So now the World is a major arcana card, and usually when it turns up, it represents, you know, the completion, the successful completion, I might add, of a situation, a cycle, an experience, right? This card usually implies a triumph, victory, or some kind of success, right? So there is that. So it could just be a matter of giving yourself a pat on the back if you've experienced some completion of a significant chapter in your life, right? Give yourself a pat on the back for getting to that place, right? It could also be like something is ending and setting the stage for the next phase or chapter in your life to start, right? Because in the major arcana, this would be the World, and then it would start with the Fool all over again. So there is that aspect. Now, with the Two of Fire that I talked about way back at the beginning of this video, this is another card that can talk about a move or relocation, but it usually carries this idea of a greater sense of distance, right? So this could be, you know, moving from one state to another if you are in the States. I'm just using it as an example because I'm here in the States, so that's relative. Or if you're thinking about moving to another part of the world, right? So there is that. Now, for some people, this could be about paying attention to your career, right? Because the idea that I talked about with the change in geography, right? Sometimes with a career, it could just be a matter of where do we go from here, right? This card can be about graduation. So for those people, it could literally mean like I'm graduating from school, you know, some type of schooling or education, and now I'm going to put myself out into the world, right? So that would be about career, right? Could also be like, you know, where do I see myself in the world at this point in time? So there is that. But if you're in business, it could also be about like looking at a wider audience, like a wider demographic. So this could be like if you're local, then this would be maybe moving from local to national, right? Again, that's the idea of being in the States here. I'm, keeping it relative. But if you're in another part of the world, then maybe how can you go from national, where you're at, and then making it international, right? A global, right? Yeah, because the words that came to me is like a global economy, right? So there is that. How can you expand on what it is that you're currently doing, right? In a much bigger way, right? Who can you, it's about being able to reach more people to serve, right? Especially if you're a service provider or you have a service-based business, right? Then it could just be that. If it's a more product-based, then it could just be a matter of, rather than being domestic, how can you go international, right? So there's those aspects with the career business side of it. More metaphysically or metaphorically, and then this card is about like a higher level of awareness. So this is about looking at the bigger picture of your life. As things come to an end, if I go back to the very first thing I said, as things come to an end, be willing to step back, take a look at the bigger picture, and then ask yourself, what did I learn from that experience or those experiences? Yeah? And how can they inform me about who I am going forward, right? Everything being about the self in terms of self-development, right? So those are some of the thoughts that I want to say about the world. Oh, I'm coming back to something. So I'm being reminded that one of my meanings for this card, if we're going back to the idea about careers, and this could be spiritually based careers, right? So it could just be a matter of you taking a look at what it is that you want to do spiritually speaking and how can you expand on it. It could also be like part of your work as a spiritual practitioner is helping other people expand their awareness, right? So I'm looking at that as a possibility. Now another thing that, because I'm seeing the more traditional, and when I say traditional, I'm talking about the Rider-Waite-Smith variety of tarot, then in that image or depiction, there's angels on the card. So this could be a matter of people who are angel practitioners. I talked about spiritual practitioners, but specifically angel practitioners, right? And working with the angels more, or expanding what it is in your work with the angels, right? So I'm seeing that as possibilities with the world. I'm feeling complete with that. So now I'm going to move on. Now that was Aquarius, so now we're going to move on to Pisces. This is great for Pisces, and I'll tell you why. So here we have the Nine of Water. So I am Piscean, and this is a card that is associated with Pisceans, right? So there are no accidents, yeah? Now in tarot, tarot theory, I want to say, or, working with tarot, this is known as the wish card. So this is a time to be looking at what it is that you hope and wish for, right? Usually when this card turns up, it's a great likelihood that what it is that you're hoping and wishing for will be fulfilled. But you have to be aware of what that is, right? If that doesn't resonate with you, then this card is about being in a place where you are experiencing a sense of emotional satisfaction or emotional fulfillment, that kind of thing. Because the 9 here is a number that represents attainment, and then of course the suit of water is about emotions, feelings. So it's about like, a sense of emotional attainment, right? We've attained something and it makes us feel a certain way, right? So now the other things about this card that I want to say is that besides the wish fulfillment aspect, this card can represent parties and something worth celebrating. So it could just be a matter of maybe you are moving into a time where there's going to be something to celebrate. And it makes me feel like there is a sense of a milestone attached to that. So I'm seeing the word milestone in my head. So maybe a sense of, again, that would be great with the idea of attainment, right? We've attained something over time and now we're celebrating that, right? The other thing I want to say is that, just be mindful of celebrations, parties that you may be invited to. And here's the thing, being mindful about not indulging too much, or being mindful about how much you indulge in, because in the traditional image there's a man who's seated in front of a table, and there are cups lined up with that. So sometimes it could be about overindulging in beverages. Just going to leave it there. Right? So there's that aspect of it. Now, for me, going with the idea about the wish, right, aspect of the card, which is why I chose a genie's lamp. If you are a magical practitioner, like I noted with Queen of Fire earlier, right? So if you're a magical practitioner, because genies are known for fulfilling wishes, but they do it magically, right? So if you are a magical practitioner, then again, this may be a nod for you to consider whether or not you want to continue to keep your brand of magic contained, right? Because a genie is always in the lamp, and then we have to rub it. So now, as I'm saying that, and I love talking out loud and hearing myself, be mindful of what it is that you hope and wish for, because there may be a rub to that, or a rub to attaining that or achieving that. What's the rub, right? But it could also be too, like the idea of rubbing the lamp could also be a metaphor for application, right? You're using your hands means that you have to take some kind of action regarding your magic, whatever your magic is. And that could be in the literal sense as a magical practitioner, or maybe, maybe in the more aspirational or metaphysical sense, right? Meaning like your own brand of magic. Like, how do you do what you do? Like, what's your mojo, quote unquote, right? So it could just be a matter of getting more in touch with that, and maybe considering whether or not you want to share that with the world rather than just keep it all to yourself, right? So that is the 9 of water. For Pisces, love that. Aries, next. Here we have the 7 of earth. The first thing that I want to say about this card, it is important for you to consider where you are putting your time, your energy, and your resources. Why am I saying that? Because for me, this card is about investment, right? But it's not just about investment. It's about getting a return on your investment, right? So this card is about reaping a harvest. If you notice in the image, a woman is holding wheat, right? That is a sign of harvest and abundance, right? But it's about paying attention to the work that you put into that. So what did it require of me in terms of reaping that harvest, right? Am I okay with the investment of my time, energy, and resources in order to reap what I harvested, right? So that's the idea with the 7 of earth. Now, another possibility here too is that this is a card that talks about, taking a break from work. So if you're a person who works a lot, like yours truly, then this card may be suggesting that it's time to take a break. And here's the thing, the element of earth, which is associated with pentacles, by the way, which I didn't say yet, is about like the break. It's worth it to take a break every now and again. Everyone needs a break, right? You can't work all the time. So everyone needs a break, and that includes you. So what would you be willing to do to invest in taking some time off? And maybe in some cases some much needed time off, yeah? Now, if you are spiritually minded, then this card is about the universal law of sowing and reaping, meaning that we always get back, reap, based on what we sow into a situation. So that could be planting metaphorical seeds, and everything starts with an intention. So when you're revisiting a situation and you're taking a look at it, what is the level of return based on the seeds that I planted, right? It could be like, if you don't like the harvest, then it could just be a matter of taking a look and saying, what different seeds do I need to plant so I can better reap the harvest that I want, yeah? But the chief message of this card, it's about being willing to take a look at what you are investing your time, energy, and resources in, and are you okay with the return that you're getting on that. So that is for Aries. Last card is going to be for Taurus. And here we have the Ace of Water. I love this. Okay, so for me, this is a card that really talks about moving into a new phase, experience, on an emotional level or a spiritual level. You can clearly see by the image it has, and this may be triggering for some people, and if so, I apologize for that. That is not intentional. I just happen to resonate with the image, right? But this is, has to do with the idea of communion, right? And so for some people that is very triggering, especially if you have experienced religious trauma. And again, if you have, I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that, because I'm sure somebody may drop that in the comments. So I'm saying that in advance, and I'm sorry to hear that you've experienced that, right? But for me, this card can talk about communion with spirit, and that would be the spirit of your understanding, right? We all experience spirit, if you believe in that, I should say. We all experience that in different ways, right? So for you, if you are a spiritual being and you are having a relationship with divinity, then this card is about, like, maybe moving into a new phase or stage or level of experience with that, right? Now, keeping with that for just a moment, the cup would represent, being open and receptive, right? So this could be, on an intuitive level, being open and receptive to insights that may help you regarding your spiritual growth and development, yeah? Right? So there's that. It could also, if we take the spiritual aspect out and maybe make it more about relationships, because the suit of water, again, the suit of cups, is also about relationships, our ability to relate to other people, right? So here we have the idea of, being open and receptive, right, to maybe a new relationship, right? If you've been contemplating about moving from a place of being single, number one, to maybe becoming a couple or wanting to be in a relationship or wanting to experience that again, then this card is about being open and receptive to it. Are you as open and receptive to that as you believe you are, right? And if not, what could you be willing to do on your end to foster a greater sense of receptivity, right? And then the last thing I will say, maybe on a more social aspect, this card is about finding outlets to be around other people, right? Relating does not just necessarily mean intimate relationships, right? Relating to all sorts of people in all sorts of ways, right? So it could just be about, this is a time to maybe consider new ways of connecting or maybe even reconnecting with people, right? Getting yourself back out there, socially speaking. What outlets would best serve and support that for you, right? And then the last thing I would say, in your relationship with yourself, the cup could represent your love tank, quote unquote. And are you running on empty when it comes to your love tank? Do you need to have your love tank filled back up? And that would be a great act of love, self-love, for you to take time away from people to get yourself maybe rejuvenated, revitalized, refreshed, so you can re-enter the world having taken care of yourself and your needs to better serve the needs of other people. So that is what I want to say with the Ace of Water. And on that note, another lightning round session is complete. If you've hung out with me so far, all the way through to the end at this point, thank you so much for giving me the gift of your time. I am very aware that as people, we can choose what we do with our time. And I'm so glad you made the choice, going back to the 7 of Earth, that you invested the time to spend here with me. And I hope it was worth it. So this is James Himm Mitchell. I'm signing off. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me at this time. And I look forward to sharing the same space with you as we move into the next season. So take care. Hope you have a great month. And I'll see you in the future. Bye.